They tried to poison him. When that failed, they shot him. When that didn't work, they beat him. And finally, they threw his body into an icy river. But according to the man who killed him, Rasputin still refused to die. For more than a century, this story has been told as a legend, a dark tale of mysticism, conspiracy, and a man who seemed impossible to kill. But when we look closer at the documents, the witness testimonies, and the autopsy itself, something strange appears. Much of what we think we know about Rasputin's death may not be true. So, what really happened that night? Most historians today believe that Grigori Rasputin was born around 1869, but Rasputin himself often claimed he was born several years earlier. Why did he do that? Because the image he wanted to create was very specific. He wanted to appear older, wiser, like a holy man. And in many ways, it worked. At the time of his death, Rasputin was only 47 years old. He had been born in the remote Siberian village of Pokrovskoye. At first glance, Rasputin was nothing remarkable, just another peasant. But many people who met him noticed one unsettling detail. His eyes, heavy, piercing, almost hypnotic. Even in photographs, his gaze seemed strangely intense. Many contemporaries later said that when Rasputin looked at you, it felt as if he could see straight into your soul. And Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna came to believe exactly that. Before appointing certain officials to high positions, she sometimes asked Rasputin to meet them, to observe them, to judge them. In her mind, Rasputin possessed an extraordinary ability to understand people, to see who was trustworthy and who was not. Imagine the influence that gave him. A man born in a Siberian village suddenly helping shape the political leadership of the Russian Empire. When Rasputin first arrived in St. Petersburg, he fascinated the city's elite. People called him a holy elder, a spiritual guide, a prophet, a healer. And he appeared at exactly the right moment. At the beginning of the 20th century, Russia's aristocracy was obsessed with mysticism. Seances, prophecies, mediums, the supernatural. Rasputin seemed like someone who truly belonged to that mysterious world. At private gatherings, he was treated almost like a celebrity. And at one of these gatherings, Rasputin met two important women, the Montenegrin princesses, Melita and Stana. They were close friends of Empress Alexandra. Through them, Rasputin was introduced to the imperial court. And from that moment, his rise was unstoppable. Some people soon believed Rasputin had become the second most powerful man in Russia. Others whispered something even more shocking. Rasputin, not the Tsar, was the man truly ruling the empire. But there was one moment that changed everything. a moment after which Rasputin became almost impossible to remove from the imperial court. And it began with a tragedy inside the royal family. For years, Empress Alexandra had struggled to give birth to a son. She already had 4 daughters, but the entire empire was waiting for a male heir. The empress turned everywhere for help: doctors, healers, mystics, anyone who claimed they could help. Finally, in 1904, the long-awaited child was born. A son, Alexei. But the joy did not last long. The boy was seriously ill. He suffered from hemophilia, a rare disease in which the blood does not clot properly. Even a small injury could cause severe internal bleeding and possibly death. For the imperial family, the future of the dynasty now depended on the fragile health of a single child. Alexei's illness brought terrible suffering. The boy experienced intense pain. He often could not sleep, and the attacks came without warning. The best doctors in Europe tried to treat him, but nothing seemed to help. The imperial family was desperate, and it was in this moment of desperation that Rasputin entered their lives. And something strange began to happen. When Rasputin was present, Alexei often calmed down. The pain seemed to fade. The boy could fall asleep. But what seemed even more mysterious was this: sometimes the attacks stopped, even when Rasputin was far away. When Alexei fell ill, a messenger from the palace would be sent to Rasputin. He would receive the message and reply with only a few words: "I am starting to pray." Then, after some time, the attack would stop. To the emperor and the empress, this looked like nothing less than a miracle. Historians and doctors today offer a much simpler explanation. Whenever Rasputin performed his ritual, he insisted on one thing: stop all treatment. No medicine, no doctors near the child. Your faith in God must be pure. At first glance, this sounded irrational, but in reality, it may have saved the boy's life. Because the doctors had been giving Alexei a medicine that was extremely popular at the time: aspirin. Today we know that aspirin is extremely dangerous for people with hemophilia, as it prevents blood clotting, which means it can make bleeding far worse. In other words, the treatment itself may have been making the illness more dangerous. Rasputin did not cure Alexei, but by stopping the treatment, he prevented doctors from making the situation worse. Did Rasputin know this? Probably not, but the effect was undeniable. And for the empress, it was proof. Rasputin had been sent by God. From that moment on, the influence of the Siberian peasant reached the very heart of the Russian Empire. At first, Rasputin's rise seemed unstoppable. He became a regular presence at the imperial court. Many people admired him, even revered him. But why? First, his charisma. Rasputin had an extraordinary ability to influence people. Some believed he could predict the future. Others believed he could heal illness. And many were simply captivated by his intense personality. Everyone seemed to see something different in him, and each person believed they had witnessed a miracle. Second, his origins. Rasputin was often described as a man of the people. For ordinary peasants, he was one of their own. For the aristocracy, he was something exotic, a mysterious peasant from the depths of Russia. At the time, that image was strangely fashionable among the elite. The Empress once even organized a Russian-style ball, where aristocrats dressed in traditional Russian costumes. Rasputin fit perfectly into this romantic vision of a mystical Russian holy man. And finally, there was the most important reason. Many believed Rasputin had saved the life of the heir to the throne. And if he saved the heir, then he saved the future of Russia. But admiration soon turned into something very different: suspicion, contempt, and eventually hatred. The first reason: Rasputin's lifestyle. He had arrived in St. Petersburg as a wandering holy man. Some even believed he was a monk, but in reality, he had never taken monastic vows, and his behavior soon began to contradict the image of a spiritual guide. Stories spread about drinking, scandals, wild parties, immoral behavior, and in many cases, those stories were true. Rasputin behaved as if he were untouchable. He caused disturbances in restaurants, created public scandals, visited prostitutes, harassed married women, and always escaped punishment. But the real scandal was something else. Rasputin openly boasted about his closeness to the Empress. He claimed she adored him, that he held enormous influence over her. And the uncomfortable truth was, he probably did. Soon, accusations of corruption followed. Rasputin began using his influence to help people obtain positions or favors in exchange for money. Of course, he was not the only person at court doing this. But Rasputin did it openly, arrogantly. The image of the humble, holy man began to collapse. Then came the greatest scandal of all: the love letters. Letters allegedly written by Empress Alexandra to Rasputin began circulating in public. Their tone suggested a deeply intimate relationship. If they were real, they would have been devastating for the monarchy. Today, most historians believe the letters were forgeries, but at the time, the damage had already been done. Public outrage exploded, and Rasputin became the focus of national anger. In 1914, Rasputin narrowly survived his first assassination attempt. A woman named Hionia Guseva attacked him on the street. She stabbed him in the stomach. The wound was severe. Yet, Rasputin survived. But the story only strengthened Rasputin's reputation. People began to say that he was impossible to kill. Meanwhile, Russia itself was collapsing into crisis. The country had entered World War I. The army suffered enormous losses. The economy deteriorated. Public anger toward the government grew. And for many people, Rasputin became the symbol of everything that was wrong with Russia. By 1916, one thing seemed certain. Rasputin's death was only a matter of time. By 1916, hatred toward Rasputin had reached its peak. Aristocrats despised him. Politicians feared him. Military officers blamed him for the empire's decline. Many believed that as long as Rasputin remained alive, Russia would continue sliding toward catastrophe. And so, several men made a decision. They would kill Rasputin. Among them were Prince Felix Yusupov, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, politician Vladimir Purishkevich, Dr. Stanislav Lazovert, and officer Sergei Sukhotin. They began planning the assassination, a plan meant to rid Russia of the man many believed was destroying the empire. But none of them imagined that their actions would create a legend. The legend of a man whom neither knife, nor poison, nor bullets could kill. But now, the main question. What really happened that night? The night that later became one of the most famous legends of the 20th century. The night of December 17th, 1916. St. Petersburg. A freezing winter night. On the Moika River stands the palace of Prince Felix Yusupov. Late that evening, a man arrives, whose name had been shaking Russian society for years: Grigori Rasputin. Yusupov used a simple pretext to lure him to the palace. He said he wanted Rasputin to meet his wife, the beautiful Irina Yusupova. To Rasputin, this seemed perfectly plausible. Aristocrats often invited him to such gatherings. He was used to attention, used to being treated as someone important. But there was one detail. Irina Yusupova was not in the palace. She wasn't even in St. Petersburg. She was in Crimea. The entire evening was a carefully prepared trap. Rasputin was led into the basement. A table was set, wine, pastries, music playing upstairs. It looked like a normal social evening. But upstairs, the other conspirators were waiting. Yusupov stayed alone with Rasputin. They talked calmly. Rasputin drank wine, ate the pastries. Minutes passed. Yusupov grew nervous. He repeatedly went upstairs to report to the others. He is still alive. According to the legend, the pastries and wine had been poisoned with cyanide. But the poison seemed to have no effect. Finally, Yusupov realized he could wait no longer. He took a revolver, returned to the basement. Rasputin stood beside the table. Yusupov raised the gun. For a few seconds, he simply stared at him. Then, he pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Rasputin in the chest. Rasputin fell. It seemed to be over. Yusupov went upstairs and announced, "Gentlemen, it is done." After a while, they decided to go back down to check the body. Yusupov approached Rasputin, leaned closer, and suddenly, Rasputin opened his eyes. He jumped up, grabbed Yusupov, and tried to strangle him. Yusupov broke free and ran upstairs, shouting, "He's alive!" Rasputin ran out into the courtyard, badly wounded, but trying to escape. Purishkevich grabbed a gun. He fired. Again and again. The third shot struck Rasputin in the back. He collapsed, tried to rise. Then another shot rang out. The bullet hit his head. The conspirators wrapped the body in a cloth, carried it from the palace, loaded it into a car, and drove to the Malaya Nevka River. There, they cut a hole in the ice. And as they prepared to throw him in, they realize something terrifying. He is still alive. So they force him under the water, hold him there, until finally, the man who refused to die dies. That is the legend. But what really happened that night? Several days later, the body was found. An investigation began. An autopsy was performed. And this is where an important detail appears. A detail that destroys most of the legends surrounding Rasputin's death. There was no water in Rasputin's lungs, which means he did not drown. No traces of poison were found in his body. Later, the doctor who was supposed to add poison to the pastries admitted something. He never actually added the poison, which means Rasputin could never have been poisoned. And then the truth became clear. Rasputin did not die the way the legend claimed. The cause of his death was simple: a bullet to the head. That shot killed him instantly. So, there was no unkillable Rasputin, no poison that failed to work, no drowning of a man still alive after several gunshots, no supernatural endurance, no miracle survival. The man whom people called a mystic, a prophet, and a demon died like many others in that era, from a bullet. And yet the story does not end there. The men who killed Rasputin believed they were saving Russia. They believed removing him would save the empire. But history took a very different path. Just 2 months later, the February Revolution erupted. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated. The Russian monarchy collapsed. And less than 2 years later, the entire royal family was executed. Which raises an unsettling question. Did Rasputin's death change anything at all? Or was the fall of the empire already inevitable? What if Rasputin had lived? Could he have changed anything? Could he have prevented the catastrophe? We will never know. But one thing is certain. The story of Rasputin is not just the story of one man. It is the story of a dying empire. And perhaps that is why the legend survives. The legend of a man who was called a saint, a charlatan, a demon, and a man who, according to the legend, seemed impossible to kill. And what do you think? Was Rasputin truly a fraud? Or was he simply a convenient scapegoat at the moment when the Russia Empire was already collapsing?